On August 24, 1943, the Nazi Party ordered the arrest of one of its members. The detainee was Ilse Koch, the wife of an SS major. Along with her husband, she had been in charge of the direction of the Buchenwald concentration camp, one of the largest in Germany, where hundreds of thousands of Jews, Romanians, political prisoners and enemy soldiers passed. It is estimated that more than 50,000 people died there because of the executions, but also because of the lack of food and poor sanitary conditions. While these kinds of aberrations were not uncommon in the Third Reich, it is believed that a line had been crossed at Buchenwald. Rumors spoke of insane torture that scared even the Nazis themselves. Once the woman was taken into custody, evidence was collected about what had happened, and what they discovered was blood-curdling. From then on, Ilse Koch would go down in history as one of the most bloodthirsty and inhumane people of that time. But what was Ilse Koch doing with the Buchenwald prisoners? To understand this ruthless woman, we must first look at her life in depth. She was born in Dresden in 1906 under the name of Margaret Ilse Koch. Her family had experienced the economic miseries of that time, but they were middle class nonetheless, and her father was a farmer who became a factory manager. During Ilse's childhood, there was nothing to indicate that she would become a monster. In fact, she was considered a normal girl with a temperate character, responsible, kind and full of friends. At the age of 15, she enrolled in an accounting school and began working in a bookstore as a shop assistant. At that time, Hitler was taking his first steps in politics, and gradually his movement was gaining popularity throughout the country. Young Koch soon manifested her interest in Nazism. In 1932, she became a member and secretary of the party. Her charisma helped her gain the trust of some important officials, such as Heinrich Himmler himself. The SS chief chose her to be the wife of her right-hand man, Karl Koch, who was serving as a colonel in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. The couple married in 1936, and she took her husband's surname. 3 years later, they were transferred to another large death camp, Buchenwald, in the forested central region of Germany. The place was built by thousands of prisoners forced to deforest the area. Above the entrance to the main building was the legend, "To each what he deserves." Commanders' wives were generally not involved in the day-to-day running of the concentration camps. The administration and treatment of prisoners was the exclusive task of Nazi officials, but Koch was the exception. She, along with her husband, was in charge of running the establishment, and there she unleashed her most perverse side. Inmates nicknamed Ilse Koch the Witch of Buchenwald for her angry personality, sadistic practices, and cold-bloodedness. She had a house built in the immediate vicinity of the extermination center, which was named Villa Koch. Since it was located near the barracks where the prisoners slept, many heard what was going on inside. Koch chose people at random, who were let indoors and flogged with a whip that had razor blade fragments attached to it. She also practiced finger crushing and skin branding with red-hot irons. The cries of pain could be heard throughout the entire place, and prevented the other prisoners from sleeping, scared by the possibility that they would be the next ones. On the other hand, Koch was also rumored to have orgies with the wives of the other SS officers and with her husband's subordinates. Psychological torture techniques were applied to some prisoners to tame them and transform them into pets at their service. One of her hobbies was to dress provocatively in front of the newcomers to Buchenwald, even going so far as to strip naked to attract their gaze. If any of them dared to look at her directly, he was punished with a fierce beating, which left him on the verge of death. Over time, the torture stopped being carried out only inside the Villa Koch, and the entire concentration camp became Ilse's macabre playground. Of all her crimes, the most infamous were those she committed together with one of her lovers, Waldemar Hoven, head of the Buchenwald Medical Research Department. They ordered the inmates to line up without clothes, and chose those who had tattoos. They executed them and extracted their skin, with which they made lampshades, gloves, or book covers. Some of these objects were sent to Berlin as gifts to the Nazi leaders. Ilse Koch's madness went so far as to decorate her house with human prisoners' heads, which were chemically shrunk and used as decorations on the dining room table. In August 1943, the SS ordered the arrest of the Koch couple on charges of illicit enrichment, embezzlement, and murder of prisoners. As Buchenwald was investigated and stories surfaced, even the Nazis felt that a line had been crossed. Koch was sentenced to prison, but, incredibly, in 1944 she was acquitted after she pretended to be suffering from a nervous breakdown. Her husband was not so lucky. He was found guilty of corruption and appropriation of public money, and consequently he was sentenced to death. He was shot in 1945, and afterward Koch tried to live a low-key life. However, before long, her past would come back to haunt her. After the end of World War II, the Allies occupied Germany and ordered the arrest of the main perpetrators of human rights violations. Koch was arrested by U.S. authorities. She was accused of being a participant in a criminal plan of degradation and massacres in the Buchenwald concentration camp. She was sentenced to life in prison, but just 2 years later, she was acquitted on the grounds that there was insufficient evidence to prove that she had tortured prisoners. Koch was released, but her case was so scandalous and generated so much outrage that justice caught her once again. In 1949, Ilse Koch was tried for war crimes, and for 7 weeks testimony was heard from 250 people who claimed to have witnessed nameless humiliations, executions, and torments. In 1951 she was sentenced to life in prison, at the same time that her civil rights were taken away. At the time of her sentence, Ilse Koch was pregnant by a man she had met in prison, and her child was even born in prison. Immediately after delivery, the child was given up for adoption, but over the years he found out who her mother was and what he had done. In 1967, Ilse Koch wrote him a letter in which she said, "There is no other way out for me, death is the only liberation." She then hanged herself in her cell with the sheets from her bed. Thus, at the age of 61, one of the most sadistic women in history died, leaving behind a legacy of horror. We have reached the end of the video. Leave us your opinions in the comment box below and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history. Thank you very much for joining us until the end. And stay tuned for our next video.